Mm.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar theme Young People's Role in Driving Digital Trends During Uncertain Time. I'm your moderator today. My name is Cynthia Singalam, and I'm from the UN Major Group for Children and Youth and a young consultant in digital and health. Thank you so much for tuning in. You are in for a treat, as you'll soon hear the UN Youth Envoy and UN Undersecretary General, together with 5 impressive youth representatives, share their takes on how youth are stepping up and demonstrating leadership and innovation, as well as the criticality of tackling digital divide and positioning innovations in a time like this. It is very important for us to make this an accessible event. You can turn the closed captioning function on by clicking the CC button at your bottom right corner. You can also download the slides. You will soon find a link to the presentation in the chat. This is an interactive session. Please submit your questions throughout the event. You can also vote for the questions, and the most popular ones will be picked by my colleagues and answered by our panelists at the end. Without further ado, we have the honor of welcoming the UN Youth Envoy, Ms. Jayathma Rakumanayake, and UN Undersecretary General, Mr. Paprizio Hostio, for their welcome remarks. We'll first turn to Jayathma. Jayathma, please.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, everywhere, and welcome to our very first Digital COVID Convo, the virtual event. I'm Jayathma Vikramanayake, and I'm the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth. And we are all joining this web conference online today, even though we had initially planned to have this meeting as an offline event during the STI forum. I think right now this consequences has pushed us to have this virtual event, which I think even more matches the theme of today's discussion. Many of us have been, since the start of this pandemic, constantly on our phones, on our mobiles, on our laptops, TVs, and devices during this quarantine. And I'm sure that our topic, the role of young people in driving digital trends during uncertain times, is a conversation that is relevant for digital natives like you and me. By staying home to support COVID-19 measures, we can now really see the importance of internet and connectivity and digital technologies to help us with our lives. Young people are not just users of technologies in this interesting time. Many of them, like the youth speakers we will have today, have been creating innovative solutions, from using 3D printers to produce face masks, to combating misinformation and hatred online, to creating data analysis of COVID-19. But we also know very well that even though technologies present great potential to solve challenges, they also present great risks. Digital technologies are widely used to advocate for, defend, and exercise human rights and protect all of us, but we have also often seen so many cases where it is abused for ill intent. And there are growing concerns that due to increasing surveillance because of COVID-19, that this will also pose a threat to human rights activists and human rights of people in general using digital technologies. Lack of gender equality and diversity in the technology development, non-binding regulations between stakeholders, and unclear accountability processes are only some of the other risks that technology acceleration has presented us. At this time of pandemic, where the world is racing with time to find solutions and adapt to the new way of life, these risks are definitely also growing as big as the opportunities. So as digital natives, young people hold a critical role, I believe, in driving these trends in tech and development and ensure that technology is used for the good of our world. Young people are users, innovators, critics, and most importantly, guardians on how technologies are developed in different areas of the world during these uncertain times. Therefore, I'm very excited today that we will be hearing your perspectives and your thoughts and your take on these issues, particularly from a group of young speakers who we are working with in different fields of technologies. And I'm excited to hear their thoughts on this. Ever since the launch of the UN's Youth Strategy, the Secretary General and the United Nations is committed to working with and for young people. We believe that young people should be engaged as equal partners and as experts, not just as beneficiaries. So I'm happy to collaborate with the Undersecretary General Fabricio Hochschild and his office, the Office of the Special Advisor on UN 75 and Digital Cooperation, and the major group of children and youth to bring you this special event. So with that introduction, I would like to pass the floor to my co-host, Fabricio Hochschild.
Thank you so much, Jayadma. And I'd like to thank all of you who've joined us to come to this great event. I mean, these are dark and difficult times, and I'd first like to express the hope that you're all safe and your loved ones are also in good health. We are living a moment of unprecedented crisis. The UN was born of such a crisis. It was born of the most destructive war ever, the Second World War, that left tens of millions of dead and hundreds of millions displaced and with their homes destroyed. Out of that terrible suffering came the vision for a world with peace and security, with social justice, and with respect for human rights. We face another challenge to that world again today, many challenges. And the question is, will we use this crisis once again to come to our senses and to work better together across borders, to face global threats, not just like this pandemic, but also global threats like climate change, like the threat of growing inequality that in 2/3 of all countries has got worse over the past decades, like the challenges of climate change, and like the challenges of disruptive technologies that bring so many advantages, but if not adequately steered, can also be a source of new insecurity, new violations of human rights, and a source of new inequalities. We want to hear from you, from all of you, about how you see the world, where you would like it to head, what you see as the priorities for our leaders in the post-COVID era, and how you think international cooperation could function better to deliver on the hopes you have for the world. And that's why we've launched this initiative, to make sure that moving forward, global cooperation is shaped by your priorities. So please join the conversation. And the easiest way to do that is by filling out our 1-minute survey. I'm also very much looking forward to listening to you today in this event. We know that we will come out of COVID with the trend that pre-existed towards digitalization greatly accelerated. However fast we beat COVID, we're not going to go back when it comes to digitalization. But like all technologies, to be of maximum benefit, it needs to be steered. And we want to hear from the very distinguished speakers that we have today, how we can do that better. The Secretary General wants to make the United Nations a platform for young people, for businesses, for civil society actors, and of course also for governments to come together and discuss how we can better manage these technologies to maximize their benefits, curtail their unintended consequences, and stop their harmful use. We're preparing a roadmap on how to go forward in that respect, And we hope for your support, but even more importantly, for your guidance, for your voices, and for your participation. And I look forward now to listening to the excellent speakers we have lined up. Thank you.
Thank you so much both for very insightful remarks, and we're really grateful that you're able to join us and open this event. Equal partners and experts, not just beneficiaries, and how encouraging it is that good things do come out of challenging times. What powerful words to start our event. Now it is time for us to turn to our 5 youth speakers who are rising luminaries doing amazing work in different areas to share their views. Leading to the day, we have convened 6 interactive dialogues to hear your ideas and experiences, which had informed the panel discussion today. The one we convened at UNMGCY was really productive, and we heard diverse participants sharing country experiences and having thought-provocative discussions. That made me very excited about today's discussion. Our first speaker is a disability advocate, a software engineer, and an SDG Young Leader. Please welcome Kartik Soni as he talks about digital inclusion. Kartik, please.
Thank you, Cynthia, and it's an honor to be here to join you guys. And my name is Karthik. I'm a co-founder at iSTEM, a software engineer at Microsoft, and an SDG Young Leader. And today, I'm basically going to be talking about how technology has been such a big enabler, but at the same time has also led to digital divide, and what we can do today, especially in the world that all of us live in today. But before I get forward, I'd just like to talk a little bit about iSTEM, where our vision really is to empower the over 1.3 billion people with disabilities around the world using technology by ensuring that they have access to the technical resources that many of us take for granted, that they can do their best work by using digital advancements such as artificial intelligence, by automating a lot of the things that were impossible for them before. And so what we try to do at iSTEM is basically provide them these resources using technology, and by providing them a community where all of them can come together and co-create solutions to the problems that the community faces today. So recently, we basically had a community call out of our community, over 1,200 people with disabilities around the world. And during this call, we talked about a lot of these challenges that people were facing, how technology was enabling them, and how in some cases, technology was failing them, and what we could do about it. And I'd like to share 4 key aspects that emerged from that discussion. The first thing has to do with digital accessibility. And, 21st century has really been remarkable when it comes to technology really helping out people with disabilities through assistive technologies. People with disabilities for the longest time had to depend on others for the most basic of things, including reading and writing. And so we can imagine that today, when we all rely on the expanse of digital information available around us, especially in a time like this, had there not been technology or assistive technology, people with disabilities would be completely left out of this entire discussion. The good thing is that we do have this technology where, for example, even I, as someone who is blind, is able to use a screen reader, which basically speaks out whatever is there on my computer monitor and provide me the information that my peers have access to about COVID-19 or about anything else that I might want to get access to. The unfortunate thing, however, is that most of the websites that we take for granted are inaccessible or incompatible with a lot of these assistive technologies, which then leads to people with disabilities relying on others despite some of this technology being there. And so one of the challenges that came up in this consultation or in this discussion was precisely this, where, when people had access to in-person assistance, they could rely on others for getting this assistance where they do not have this assistance now. And so what is important then is to ensure that when we're developing technology or when we're presenting information or putting it online, it is accessible for the over 1.3 billion people with disabilities as well, and we're really being inclusive. The second thing has to do with information in general and how it is presented. So all of us know that the kind of information being presented right now, which is to really help people understand what they should be doing, a lot of this is visual, or a lot of this has to do with news items that often do not have sign language, for example, or they do not have captioning. And so again, it leaves out a lot of people with disabilities who do not even have access to what they should be doing, how they should be doing, what are the important provisions that the governments in their respective countries or cities are pushing out. A lot of the PDFs that all of us take for granted again are completely inaccessible. And so that presents another sort of digital divide that, you know, we as young people need to try and solve. Now, the good thing is a lot of the young people are stepping up to solve this challenge, where there are now accessible websites that are being developed to, for example, convert graphs and other images that we see that give us information about COVID-19 and other stuff to be presented in a way that can be consumed by, for example, someone who is blind or visually impaired. So really, people are using this opportunity to innovate, to really think about the digital divide more generally and more specifically as applicable in this particular circumstances that we find ourselves in. The third thing has to do with resources. And so one of the most important things that continues to remain is that people with disabilities continues to be very marginalized. You know, people still do not have the resources that they need. A lot of them don't even have the basic resources and have to depend on others, especially those living in semi-urban or rural areas. And so, for example, WhatsApp and technologies like that, other communication platforms have been absolutely key to connect them with volunteers and resources in this time of need. And so again, technology has been extremely helpful and an enabler to be able to provide them the support and this guidance that they need amidst these difficult times. And the fourth and final aspect that actually was pretty interesting to me as well, and something that we don't think about often, is recreation. You know, when we think about people with disabilities, we're often just thinking about education, employment, and basic needs. But what about recreation? That is equally important, and much more so as people find themselves at homes, you know, with not much to do or with more time. And this has actually brought to light that, again, we haven't been inclusive there. As youth with disabilities, as for children with disabilities, there aren't accessible games. People cannot engage with people without disabilities, which further expands the divide that we see between people with and without disabilities in our society. But again, people have stepped up to it, and there are actively a lot of accessible games and recreational activities being developed that not only help people enjoy themselves, but also really bring about this empathy in people without disabilities when they work and play with people with disabilities. So I'm very optimistic. I believe that technology already is having an important role to play in ensuring that people with and without disabilities can come together in helping us realize this inclusion in the society. There are still gaps, and we as young people need to do something about it. We need to step up, we need to innovate, and we need to guarantee inclusion for all in this digital space. Thank you, and I'd like to now pass over to Roman to share his remarks.
Dear Kartik, thank you very much. Very impressive presentation. And on behalf of Friends for Leadership community, I would love to cooperate with you, and let's try to make our social media, our web pages accessible for all those health disabilities, young people, and all other global citizens. Hello, everyone. My name is Roman. I am a Russian Y20 Sherpa. I also represent Russia in the UN Internet Governance Forum Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group. And as part of Friends for Leadership International Community, yesterday I hosted the discussion on global governance, where we were honored also to have Fabricio Hochschild to give some introductory remarks as we were discussing digital cooperation. What was really important is that all speakers, and we have gathered a very diverse panel from people working on multilateral affairs for 10 years to humanitarian activists from the ground. All people think that right now we are witnessing a huge and drastic change, and we need to adjust to it. As we see that we have elaborated unifying norms of behavior to stay home, how to cope altogether with this COVID-19 situation, we think that we should not wait for the same situation in the digital space. And as we discuss global governance in the digital age, let's discuss global digital governance right now before it's too late. Let's think about unifying platforms which will enable all the stakeholders to collaborate, to cooperate on digital governance, to share responsibilities, to have a universal framework agreement between all the stakeholders defining position of states, technological community, young people in civil society. And this is how we can make our digital governance more inclusive. What is more important, we need to raise the new generation of leaders who will lead our communities to the brighter future we want and leave no one behind. We need to think about those leaders who share responsibility, who ensure and enable trust between the countries, between the largest stakeholders of the global governance, those who respect human rights and dignity. And we believe that altogether, we are now working on this. And here I want to thank the UN 75 office, as well as UN Youth Envoy and her team, as well as UN MGCY for tremendous efforts you guys put on everyday basis. And we as Friends for Leadership, we are ready to join you. And let's continue this successful experience of gathering interesting young people for these discussions online, even after these events. Right now, I would like to thank you all for attention and give the floor to Roshni. Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Roshni. It's an honor to be part of this incredible conversation and speak about digital trends during uncertain times, particularly the role we as youth play in fighting this pandemic. Now, we are really beat, but fortunately, on our side, and the impact of this calamity has really softened on our lives to having digital technology. Things in terms of healthcare. Firstly, testing. We are seeing a rise in digital epidemiology tools, chatbot helpers, and rapid response. Different strategies such as pool sample analysis is allowing us to exponentially expand our capabilities for mass testing. Coming to tracking, now when we have so much community, it is all to this. Integration of contact tracing functionality into underlying systems Smart opens doors to deeper data integration efforts. And there has been so much data-driven modeling for simulating the efficacy of physical distancing. We talk about flattening the curve and predicting when this pandemic will reach its peak or turning point. And this has been possible due to more informed decision-making and policy formulation around data. Next, I will speak about treating, which is probably the most important part of all this. And techniques like genomic sequencing have allowed us to really look into the genomes of this virus. Thousands of viral genomes of COVID-19 have been shared by scientists all across the world, and we are able to now understand this disease in greater detail and also follow how it has emerged and evolved over the past few months. I have seen, like in the scientific community, I'm able to see firsthand unprecedented data sharing and collaboration between scientific teams all over the world. Even journals are accelerating their peer review process so that papers and results are accessible to all of us quicker, and we are able to solve this challenge. Also, industry is collaborating. We have additive manufacturing companies who are helping us produce face masks with 3D printing technology. Automakers are making ventilators, and just helping medical device companies scale up all the critical equipment. I can say doctors are able to consult with patients from their homes without being physically present in the hospital. Lastly, I will talk about mental health, which I feel is able to be as productive as we usually are or expect ourselves to be. There has been so many resources for coping for wellness that involve digital therapy, and these can really help us during this time. It's all possible due to digital technology. Social networking, social media, events like this would not be possible if it was not for digital tech. We can communicate with people all over the world and reconnect with our friends and family as well. Personally, part of scientific discovery acceleration, because I'm seeing in network how collaboration and data really accelerated our outbreak response. My office has been converted into a PPG contamination zone, and I'm seeing how the appreciation of science and respect has really increased because we are able to impact the lives of so many people. In this international war against the virus, we have realized that it is because of science and scientists that we have been able to make it so far, and this will help us really get through this. My call to action for the youth is that we take note of all the things that have gone wrong and all the things that we have done right in this pandemic, so that in the future, when we are in charge, we are better prepared to be in a situation where we can tackle this face on without our society coming into shambles like this time. So networks are very so much out, have so much reach, and we are able to spread credible sources, spread authentic information about persons, take outside for their personal development, help the elderly, and put their skills to good use. Thank you so much again for having me here. Thanks to the UN for organizing this incredible dialogue. Now I will hand it over to John to speak about trust and security.
Thank you so much, Roshni, and thank you to all the organizers for putting this together and for everyone for joining us today. It's an honor and a privilege. My name is John Herring. I actually worked for Microsoft's digital diplomacy team out here in Seattle, Washington. But I'm here today representing and giving voice to Digital Peace Now, a global movement of concerned citizens demanding more be done to promote peace and security online and to discourage the weaponization of cyberspace by governments in particular. Now, the Digital Peace Now movement grew out of a petition that was first launched actually alongside the UN General Assembly back in 2018, but which today includes over 130,000 supporters from citizens of over 170 countries around the world, calling for government action to stop escalating conflict in cyberspace, which is growing year over year and putting people everywhere at risk. We're supported by a coalition of industry and civil society organizations, and Digital Peace Now engages in key forums, meeting with activists, technologists, peace groups, obviously in sections like this with all of you, to drive greater awareness about a growing issue that isn't being talked enough, namely escalating cyber conflict. This effort is about activating digital citizens to demand an end to reckless behavior online that puts us all at risk. Now, digital citizens can be of any age, but of course, we are disproportionately the youth from around the world, those of us who have grown up as digital natives and know the benefits of connectivity and of our networked world, and how important it is that we protect it. It's never been more important right now. During this global pandemic, when so many of us are depending on a safe and reliable digital infrastructure for connecting with our loved ones, for our livelihoods, for our learning, and increasingly for our lives. Like everyone else on this discussion today, we've been in a dialogue with our community recently, including an online discussion on Twitter this week, but then a broader conversation as well about just how COVID-19 has changed not just how we use technology, but also what digital citizens think is most important to protect right now. Unsurprisingly, and we heard you loud and clear, a lot about how important it is to protect hospitals, health services, the people who are literally saving lives every day. And it's easy to forget that devices, like some of the ones Roshni was just speaking to, like ventilators, these are often network connected to improve their functioning, to give real-time reports to doctors, but it's this same connectivity that can make them vulnerable to cyber attack, the types of things that should not be tolerated. However, indeed, whole hospital systems have been hit by sophisticated cyber attacks just in recent weeks, including hospitals in France, in the Czech Republic, and elsewhere across the world, delaying care for the most vulnerable just when it is most needed. There have also been cyber attacks on public health groups, including the World Health Organization, which reports suggest were actually carried out by nation states during a pandemic. And just to repeat that, those are attacks on the World Health Organization during a pandemic. And we don't hear much about this in media, and that's for a variety of reasons, creating challenges on reporting on technical issues that can be difficult to communicate, but we need to see more, and we need to promote calls for actions to stop this behavior. The Red Cross, as just one example, has proposed a new international norm that would expressly prohibit these kinds of cyber attacks on hospitals by governments, which seems really hard to argue with but we still haven't seen enough traction behind. But even beyond just the healthcare industry, we've heard that from you, and while we're all working at home and learning from home, and even trying to stay connected while social distancing, the internet is more important across sectors. Video conferencing, like what we're all doing right now, food delivery apps, especially for those who can't prepare their own meals, and online shopping to avoid crowded stores. These have all become critical services at a time when we're trying to slow the spread of a disease. But they're all things which rely on a functioning internet that is characterized by peace and security. This is why we're so encouraged by the recent and growing leadership that we're seeing from the United Nations, beginning with Secretary General Guterres' call just the other week for a global ceasefire during this pandemic, and then followed up importantly by Undersecretary Hochschild's call for a digital ceasefire to be part of that as well. We need peace and security online just as much as we need peace and security offline. So what do we need from you? Well, we need you to get involved. It is just too darn easy to tune out the world right now while we're all social distancing. But now is the time to insist on responsible behavior online by states in particular. So this boils down to two things. We need you to get engaged, and we need you to take action. To get engaged, we hope you'll join us at digitalpeacenow.org. Follow us on Twitter, where we share updates on this issue and what's going on to keep you informed and aware. But we also highlight opportunities for you to take action, to have your own voice heard, including a resource hub with latest information on cyber conflict and resources to share, and ways to take action to find your own voice in this increasingly important issue. To help encourage governments to promote digital peace, especially during this pandemic. We identify petitions, consultations, and other ways to lend your support. We also highlight other forums and ways to get involved, including an upcoming Apps for Digital Peace contest, which is, I think, co-sponsored by a few different UN offices. This is a competition for those under 35, proposing new technology solutions to these peace and security challenges online, with like $15,000 in prize money available and a chance to present your idea alongside the UN General Assembly this September. But these are just a couple of the ways that we try and stay on top of these things. We hope that you will join us, because turning the tide against reckless behavior online really will take all of us together, speaking with a loud voice, demanding change from our leaders. I just want to close by again thanking the organizers for putting this together and including us in this discussion, and to recognize once again the leadership that the UN is showing in hosting these important dialogues. And I'm now very pleased to, I believe, turn to a video message with a human rights angle on these issues from friend and colleague Ephraim.
Thank you for this opportunity to be among this group of young people. These are unprecedented times, especially in the digital age. We find that we've had pandemics before, but then we've not had them to this scale whereby everything has stopped before during the digital time. So some of the key things which I would like to put forward, and which I had a conversation with a few young people on Twitter, on WhatsApp, on various channels, trying to promote this event and today's conversation, is that there are two main things which we need to keep an eye on. This pandemic offers an opportunity for companies, governments, institutions to have investments when it comes to connectivity, but not just investments, not just investing money to connect more people, but also investing in the knowledge, trying to build capacity, especially in the global south. We find in Africa, which has around 1 billion population, we have more than 50% not connected to the internet. We need more connection. The second thing which is very key is, despite increasing connectivity, we need to ensure that this connectivity is being increased in a human rights respecting manner. So we find the various principles, the human rights principles for connectivity and development. There are 9 principles, which I will not have the time to refer in right now, but I have referred to them in my Twitter before, that we need to ensure that even as we connect people, we need to ensure that the internet is rights respecting. So the ideas of an internet that is built on surveillance, we need to cut that out and ensure that there's more connection and less surveillance and more human rights respecting internet as we go forward, especially in this pandemic period. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kartik, Roman, Roshni, John, and Ephraim. Really insightful interventions, and it's really encouraging to hear thoughtful reflections and an inspiring experience in different areas of innovations. I hope you all learned as much as I did about how youth are or can be involved in improving accessibility, global governance, research, building digital trust, as well as defending human rights. And if anything, all speaker sharing really highlights the importance of having youth involved, not just in the dialogues, but also on ground in the design and implementation of community and global interventions. We see that some of you have already submitted questions. Please keep them coming. And before we have our Q&A, we'll have Fabrizio and Jayatma to give their response remarks. We'll first have Fabrizio. Could you please share your reflections with us? Maybe there's some technical difficulty on his end. Maybe we'll first turn to Jayatma for your reflection.
I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, we can.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So I was saying I found the remarks from Kartik, Roshni, Roman, John, and Ephraim really very inspiring. And I'm so glad that we have a good batch of participants from many different countries in the world. I had three main points. We can't just leave digital technology to be steered by the invisible hand of the market. If we want to make sure that these technologies benefit all, benefit those who too often are left behind or excluded by societies, we need a more conscious steer, more conscious policies and regulations to ensure that these technologies are truly inclusive in the benefits they bring. And the second point is we need to make sure that these technologies promote the greater public good. The invention of the internet was done by a bunch of, many of them are still alive, idealistic academics for a freer, more democratic sharing of knowledge and information. But if you look at what it's evolved into 30 or 40 years later, it's above all a commercial enterprise, and a fraction of a percentage of what's available on the internet is actually for the greater public good, or is in fact publicly accessible. And I think we need to do our utmost, and that's my second takeaway, to reassert the internet and digital technology is ultimately serving the public good. And the call for the digital technologies, above all, to be in the service of peace, above all, to be in the service of dignity of all and the human rights of all, I think is fundamental and cannot be repeated and said often enough. And my third takeaway is that the digital natives, youth, those who will be most affected by the consequences of the actions or lack of it of policymakers today, need to be part of that conversation. And so we very much, from the UN perspective, want to do our utmost to empower your voices, to make you part of the conversation, and we want you to join with us, and we want us to join with you precisely to follow up on some of these key messages and key objectives that we fully share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fabrizio. And as Fabrizio said, it was quite impressive to hear the conversations that has happened beforehand and the perspectives shared by all of you. A few key points that I think our youth speakers touched on, but I would like to emphasize a little bit more. And I really liked Ephraim's message on human rights, and I remember an example of how access to digital technologies, how access to internet particularly is also an access to our right to the freedom of expression, because many young people all around the world are using now internet, social media to protest, to demonstrate. With lockdowns happening all around the world, every day, Friday, climate strikes are now happening online. And all the demonstrations that happened offline on the streets have now transformed into a digital format. But if people do not have access to these platforms, if people can't afford to buy or purchase internet, then it is also in a way, I feel, curtailing their freedom of expression in these difficult times. And the second one I wanted to highlight is something that I hear a lot in my town halls with young people. It's the violence on the internet. So the bullying, the harassment, the sextortion that happens on the internet, particularly targeting sextortion young women and girls, but also bullying and harassment that happens online, particularly for adolescents, children, and young people, and things like child pornography that many people don't even know is illegal. So I think violence on the internet and violence in digital spaces is also something that we need to be paying attention to. Secondly, I don't think this came up, but I'll be really interested to hear your thoughts and also our viewers' thoughts on sort of the impact of digital technologies, internet, and particularly social media on our political systems, with the social media platforms increasingly being core to election campaigns and being decisive factors between politicians being elected and not, and platforms like Twitter even saying political advertising is not allowed on Twitter, but about Facebook and other platforms which are currently being used for such political campaigning. How do we as young people make sure that we activate digital citizenship in these platforms as well? And last but not least, certainly the gendered element to it. And there is a huge digital gender gap. And I think if we look at our speakers also, we see one young woman and 4 young men. And I think we need to do better. We need to be encouraging more young women to study STEM subjects, and we need to have a better representation of women in digital governance, but also encourage girls to study technology and increase digital literacy. I'll end with this very small example. A while ago, I came across this organization called FAT, F-A-T, Feminist Action for Technology. It was an organization based in India, and their story completely fascinated me. So this group of young people went into a village thinking they could train the girls in the village, a rural village in India, and give them technology skills. But what they found was that the society and their families didn't want the girls to learn computer. They didn't want the girls to learn how to operate a computer. So the youth organization completely had to change their approach and say that, no, we are going to teach English to these girls and attract the girls to come to the training center, but they taught English via laptops. So they wrote essays on Microsoft Word by giving the girls the opportunity to learn how to operate basic computer applications. So these very grassroots examples in young people trying to break through these barriers and stereotypes certainly inspire us, but of course they need a lot more support from governments, from the international community, in order to make it a level playing field for girls. Thank you.
Thank you so much both for your reflections. It's so encouraging to hear speak up about the importance of transparent and conscious steering of technologies to promote public good. And indeed, basic infrastructure, human rights, citizenship, and gender equality, we must make sure that we don't forget about these very important things. It really does take all of us together to innovate and magnify positive impact from all corners of the world. So we are seeing quite some active question submission going on. We've got your questions, and my colleagues already picked the most popular ones. So we'll first have our first question, which is for Kartik. Kartik, how can technologies be designed to specifically address gaps in digital inclusion?
Yeah, thanks for that question. There are globally defined standards that can help in helping us to do so. So, for example, for accessibility, there's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that really help us ensure that our web applications and other applications are accessible for everyone, including all people with disabilities. And so, the first thing, and there are a lot of resources available online that basically provide this information in a way that is easy to understand, easy to use, easy to consume. We at iSTEM also organize webinars from time to time, really trying to help people understand from the very basics what accessibility means, what does it take to make something inclusive on the internet so that everyone can access it. So I invite you to join us at inclusivestem.org and really be a part of this, where, especially if you are an engineer, you are a technologist, it really does not take a lot to make things accessible. It's just one line of code here, one line of code there, and now the thing that you're developing will be accessed by billions of people that otherwise could not access it. So really think about it. Just one line of code could make your application accessible. So a lot of information available online, a lot of sample code, a lot of very easy ways to do that. And by the way, this is not just limited to technology. I think of accessibility even for documents. When you're writing your Word document, how many of us ensure that we describe images that we put in our Word documents? How many of us ensure that whenever we're making videos, YouTube, especially a lot of us are now on YouTube or Netflix. How many of us ever pay attention that, oh, does this video have captions? Does this video have audio description so that someone who cannot see can also understand the visuals in the video? And all of that really does not take all that much, but it just needs us as young people, especially who really know technology today, who really can shape the kind of technology we want to see in the future. We taking a step and saying, well, we want to make the technology inclusive and accessible for everyone, and we are going to do our part, and we're also going to encourage others to do that. So I think if we decide to make that happen, we certainly can make that happen and make sure that it's accessible to everyone. So yeah, I really invite you to come on board and really be a part of this with us and work towards equity for everyone, for inclusion for everyone online, especially.
Thank you so much, Kartik. I cannot agree more. I'm also a UX designer myself, and it really takes one to be mindful of good practices and remember to add that alt tag for everything that you create. Now we have a second question, and it's directed to Fabrizio. Fabrizio, one of our audience asked, are you concerned that COVID-19 will widen the inequality gap between countries? What do you think, Fabrizio?
I think undoubtedly it will. The implications of the digital divide, the implications that half the world is connected and half the world is not connected. And when it comes to women, it's not half-half. It's about 65-35. A much larger majority of men are connected than women. And the implications of that divide will become much more serious, because how are we managing in the COVID era to stay in touch with our families and friends? How are we managing to continue our studies? How are we managing in many cases to continue our work through digital means? So those who don't have those means will be left even further behind than they already are. And I don't think that problem will go away once we overcome COVID. I think the trend towards digitalization for those who have it is here to stay. So we'll be doing more and more. We'll be doing more digital health, digital education, digital finance. But that means that those who don't have digital will be left out on their own, and they will fall further back. And the other aspect of the digital divide is the nature of our jobs. There are three types of people who are going to weather this, who are living through this crisis at the moment. Those of us who can transfer their work and do it digitally, and at the UN that includes most of us, we're among the most fortunate lot. Those who still have essential jobs in the analog world, and that's doctors, nurses, people working at supermarkets, people doing the cleanups in places. Those two groups of people, one way or another, are not going to be disproportionately affected economically. But there's a whole third group out there, and they arguably make up the majority, whose jobs cannot be digitalized and who are not counted as essential workers and therefore cannot work. So I think we'll see inequality growing much worse, and we'll see a resurgence of poverty. And that's why I think our first priority, one of the first priorities for the world coming out of this, has to be to work much harder and much faster and much better together at getting safe, affordable, and practical access for all as a basic human right to digital technology.
Thank you so much for that very, very, very thoughtful response. And I think that it is important for us to have that in mind as we innovate to address all these challenges that we're facing. Now we have a last question, and it's directed to John and Jayatma. How do we ensure safe digital spaces for young people, especially as we spend an increasing amount of time on digital platforms? An attendee from Indonesia raised concerns about cybercrimes, online scams, and cyber attacks. John, what do you think?
I think this is a great question, and I'm really glad that somebody asked it, because I think particularly on cybersecurity issues, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed by the threats, by the challenges, to kind of throw your hands up and say, I have to trade security just to sort of be online. And that really shouldn't be the trade-off. First of all, there are a lot of ways in which you as individuals should feel empowered to keep yourself safe online. There's a lot of good tips and support there. I don't have time to go through all of them, but things like updating your systems regularly, enabling two-factor authentication. These types of practices can help keep you safe through basic responsible cyber hygiene. But then a lot of these trends and challenges go beyond what any individual or any community or even any single country is going to be able to do on its own. And we're going to need multilateral responses to sort of turn the tide on some of these trends. We want to make sure that it's becoming less advantageous for governments to sort of develop some of these most sophisticated cyber weapons in secret. So, encouraging transparency about things like investment in military capabilities, pushing governments to make clear commitments about what is appropriate and what is not appropriate online. These are the things that we're going to need government leadership on. And thankfully, there are multiple bodies at the United Nations that are talking about this right now, including a group of governmental experts, as well as an open-ended working group. The norm I mentioned earlier that the ICRC had introduced, the Red Cross, about protecting hospitals from cyber attacks, they were making that request to a UN body. However, those UN discussions, they're not, not transparent, but they're not things that we socialize in the media nearly enough. And so they're things that we as citizens, and particularly digital citizens everywhere, need to stay on top of and start insisting on some results out of. But I love this question. There's a much deeper response that I'd be happy to go into, and I know more of our community would love to talk about it too. So please get at us on Twitter and follow up, and we'd love to carry the conversation further. But thank you, Cynthia, and over to you or Jayatma.
Thanks, John. Not a lot to add to what you said. I think, as you said, regulation and accountability is extremely important. But one of the other things I would just like to add on is the importance of education. We know that young people are, not just because of COVID, but young people are increasingly spending more and more time online as we move towards the future. But our education systems still do not empower young people with the necessary skills they need to also protect and defend themselves. I'm not talking necessarily about digital skills. I'm talking also about analytical skills, logical thinking skills. When they see a scam, when they see a potential trouble, are they able to identify that, verify that? What is the kind of thinking that you need in order to analyze the misinformation that is in front of you? So I think the only place I've seen is Finland that this is integrated into the formal education curriculum. But I think as we move forward and as digital technologies become an an essential part of our life, it's very important that this is integrated into education curriculums as well. And this education should also, I believe, be enhanced to awareness as well, because some of the things that, some of these links that I've been getting on WhatsApp, like click this for free Netflix for 1 year or whatever, actually came from my parents. So I think the older generations who are now being exposed to digital technologies also need a lot of capacity building and awareness raising in order to protect themselves from these issues as well. So I think education community building is very important. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm afraid that's the time we have for live Q&A, but don't worry, for all those folks out there who submitted questions that were yet to be answered, they will be recorded and answered on social media. So stay tuned and keep following the online conversations. Before we end, we will have Jayathma and Fabrizio again for some words of wisdom before we close the event. Jayathma, would you please?
Just to say, Cynthia, I forgot to mention earlier on the question from Indonesia on how do we protect young people from like cyber crimes and online violence. We did a session with UNODC. It's available now on YouTube, and I will post a link to that session on the chat box so you can watch it there. UNODC, our colleagues were sharing very specific examples where young people were targeted, how to identify and how to protect yourselves online. So I'll post the link to that below. And just to say, wrapping up, thank you to everyone. Just a big shout out to the team who has been working behind the screen. We are the faces that you see in this event, but there's a lot of people behind the scene on the chat boxes on WhatsApp who are working very hard right now to make this happen. So to all those our colleagues in the behind the cameras, thank you very much for the work that you did to pull this together as well. Thank you.
No, thank you. I'd also like to echo those thanks. I'd also like to stress, I hope this is the beginning of many conversations on this theme. I think probably the two aspects that will most dominate our future is how we handle climate change and how we handle new technologies, whether we're able to maximize their benefits or whether they become a source of, at least for many, growing inequalities, incursion on our human rights, and a new frontier for security threats. So I think we need to revamp our approach to new technology and get away from, as much of the world is already doing, from a rather laissez-faire approach to one, as we've done in the past so successfully with nuclear technology, for example, to one where there's a much greater global steer. And the Secretary General is very keen to position the United Nations as a platform for the debate of how that should happen, in full recognition of knowing how complex it is, knowing that old approaches with heavy conventions won't work. So that's why he's now going to issue a roadmap which will set out a way forward. But the key elements of that roadmap is the idea of having multi-stakeholder bodies that bring together civil society, business, and member states to try and give a greater steer so that these technologies really assist in the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals, reduce the potential for conflict, and uphold our human rights. And I'd really appeal to all of you to read that roadmap when it comes out and hopefully also join our processes and become part of a momentum for change that secures a better future. Thank you.
Part of a momentum for change. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope that you are all learning as much as I am. And if there's only one takeaway, remember that you yourself hold a critical role in steering digital trends and promoting meaningful youth involvement. Don't forget to also respond to all the calls for actions by all our speakers as well. If you missed part of it, don't worry, we'll have the recording available online later. We also encourage you to keep the conversation going online. Here is a list of social media handles of ours. We would love to hear from you. Please feel free to use the hashtag #DigitalCOVIDConvo to keep the conversation going and spread the word. Thank you once again for everyone joining us today. Stay healthy and safe, and we look forward to seeing you engaged in more meaningful discussions later. For now, bye.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.
And we're clear.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.